Thanks for coming today. I'm going to talk about DevSecOps. I'm looking for a timer so that I know how long I'm talking, but I don't see one. So we'll see what happens. So who am I? I'm David Hafley. I work for Contrast Security. We are a team that's distributed across the US. We have offices here in the Bay Area. Most of our engineering work is done in Baltimore or either remotely. And then, what does Contrast Security do? We're an application security product. That's an agent-based technology that can run both pre-production to do some vulnerability assessment, as well as in production to block your applications from attacks. I was on Twitter, as I'm sure many of you guys were, in the past, and I start seeing this hashtag called Stop Sucking, and I read a little bit about it and follow the journey about how there are all of these straws that are showing up in the ocean, and what a huge problem this is. And I kind of, I recognize that it is a big problem, and it's a small thing. I never thought, whenever I go to a restaurant, that a straw could have such an impact. And then, there's all this plastic, and it's everywhere. And it takes a long time for plastic to decompose. And so, one thing that it reminded me of is that I can make a simple choice that can impact, the environment over a long haul. And it made me start thinking about how there's all these straws in every restaurant. You look down on the table and there's 15 straws for 4 people. It's just a waste. And so we're also, in the meantime, we're deploying all these new applications every day. And so are we doing things to make sure that our applications are safe and secure as we deploy them to production? And we're not only introducing new applications, we're deploying them in new places and in new ways and more often. Oops. And so for a lot of us, it's a really, really happy, wonderful place. We're able to have control of our complete life cycle. We can contribute code. We have a PR with our colleagues. Our colleagues review it. They give us feedback. We run it through our testing pipelines, and then we deploy it. We no longer have to go through long change cycles and do a waterfall process that takes, weeks or months or years to release software. And in many places, it's really fun that you can push your microservice or your new application, with these automated checks and balances. But, are we really doing anything to, protect our environment in the middle of the ocean? With all these new deploys, are we really, the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we putting trash in the middle of the ocean? And so, I'm sure we all here, who's heard of DevOps before, right? I don't know if you guys have seen 30 Rock, but DevOps has been this topic that we've all been exposed to over the last few years, and I think for everyone here, it's all started somewhere different. For me, it started with 10 years ago or so. I was working for an ed tech company, and we had a problem that was really intermittent, and it turns out that a sysadmin had forgotten to upgrade one of our libraries on one of our servers. And so this is around the time that Chef and Puppet and some of these config management libraries were rising in popularity. And for myself, it was just this light bulb of opportunity that hey, we don't have to have this problem. We can do a lot of things at scale, and with software that I was used to as a developer, to ensure that our servers and our hardware and our infrastructure that we deployed on was the same. And so we see that more and more. And I'm sure for those of you here, your story may be different. Whether you're in IT or a developer or an operator, it all has a different tale. Maybe it started with your deployment pipeline or your infrastructure. And so, now here we're talking about DevSecOps, right? What are we going to do next? It's just one more thing. First it was, we have to figure out how to deploy our application, and then it was, we're going to monitor it, and we have to own it and be accountable, and now we have to do security too. It's oh man, where does it stop? And for many of us, whether it's, we're operators building AMIs, or we're building serverless applications, or building a traditional war with it's going to run on a JVM. It's the list of things we do just continues to get broader and broader and broader. And I just, I'm sure that now everyone is here, and we're interested in DevSecOps, and sometimes it may feel like you're on this ship that's just on fire, and you just keep going. But I think we have to remind ourselves that the reason that this all came about was because we realized that through the power of software and automation, we could really get this software to our customers faster, and we could make their lives better. We could resolve issues and bugs in our software. We could provide better services to them, day over day. If we embraced automation and we pushed, our source code to them, as early and as quickly as possible, and in a safe way. But if they can't use our software, our customer isn't achieving any value from it. And so, as we come back to security, I'm sure that many of you here, if you're a developer, if you're an operator, security means something different to you. If you're building an application, you're concerned with application level libraries and SQL injection within your ORM or something of that nature. But if you're an operator, perhaps there are, attacks going on in production at the OS or at the application layer that, you need to be aware of. And that's a question is, what's going on today? Like, how do you do security today? And I think that's different depending on who you are. And I think that, one other thing I'd like to highlight is that, between the two of us, developers and operators, like the lines are blurred and every place we work is different. And everyone's DevSecOps journey is going to be different. So, depending on who you are, that's going to kind of impact, where you fall in this Venn diagram of security work. And so there, to us, there's really 4 kinds. There'd be business security around like the controls that you build around your processes. Unplanned security work, maybe an attack or some firefighting. There's a new Struts 2 vulnerability last week. How are you aware of that? How are you getting feedback about it? And what are you going to do about it? Operational security, there's just things we need to do generally around like adding patches to our software and ensuring that we're, running automatic updates and just general time-based tactics that we should check and validate and ensure that, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, it's fine, no big deal. And then there's internal security too. I think that it's really important to highlight that as we go on this DevSecOps journey, we want to continue to think about security earlier and earlier in the process. We want to do our threat modeling early. If we're building a new feature, if we're moving to a new data center, we're going to introduce a new application. How do we do that as early as possible in the process? I kind of just want to smile because, yeah. So anyway, I think it's important that we consider, security as part of our architecture and our infrastructure, along the way. So, all right. So I'll make the case that, whenever you're building your product, it's going to be easier to think about security very early in the process. What you don't want to do, and really the value of DevSecOps, just like with the change from dev to DevOps, is you don't build your application as quickly as possible, then throw it over the fence and then wait. You're able to address your security challenges early in your pipeline, both at the design stage and as well as your pipeline. So. This picture always resonates with me, so it's easier to think about and talk about these things early. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's a folksy saying, but I think it carries a lot of weight here. And so there really, I think there's about 6 ways that DevSecOps applies here. Empower engineering teams is really where Sumo Logic helps us at Contrast. We send everything under the sun into Sumo Logic. I was joking earlier that one of my favorite features is the HTTP sources input, because we can just post any kind of information to it from any product that has an integration or doesn't, and parse it however we need to, whether it's with regex and build a dashboard and then share it without our company. So Sumo Logic really helps us there with empowering engineering teams, as well as making security visible. I think there's a tendency a lot of times to put security, in an office in a corner where you don't want to talk about it. But one of the tenets, in my opinion, of DevSecOps is to, have it in the open, have it be present, have it be in a place where, it's not hidden. You don't want to not talk about it because it's bad. And then, coming back to the concept of shifting left, I'm going to come back to this in a second, but the earlier you do it in the process, the better. Whether it's in your pipeline, in your software development process, or working with your product managers on how you're building something, it's incredibly valuable and will help you build better, more secure software, along the way. Continuous security. I hope everyone here has an automated pipeline, and so. In that pipeline, we want to ensure that along the way we're testing our applications, libraries, and custom code for vulnerabilities, as well as making sure that we're getting that feedback, to use engineers and operators around like what's changed with the application. Is it, the development team has introduced a new library that has a known CVE, or is it a PR gotten opened that has has a SQL injection flaw in it? We want to be able to know that as soon as possible, because if we don't, back to the other slide, if we can prevent it, then there's no problem in production if we don't deploy with that vulnerable code. And then the last tenet here is security as code. I think it's important to have security in your PR process as well as your infrastructure and things of that nature. So the more you can automate your security processes and not make them be people and process based, the stronger your security will be. So this is a screenshot of just a very simple integration that we built, where we consume our own agent logs at contrast and then send them to Sumo logic. We do not have a map in our product, and I really find joy in looking at where attacks come from on a map. And so, so I built this, and you can see here that this is just some sample data, but we had five attacks come in from the East Coast, 2 in the Northeast, and then 90 came from Kansas. And so it looked like almost all of those were exploited, and then the rule was a read DOS rule, and then some IP addresses over there on the right to dig into if you need to do any further investigation of those. I saw a good presentation earlier where, I think it was NordCloud was talking about taking this information, these like long-term persistent threats, and some of this data can drive, deeper investigation like that. But this is just one way. I wanted to highlight how we use Sumo Logic, because it's, such a great tool, and gives so many people in our company visibility, where they have whatever department they're in, they can see something neat like this, and it's pretty ubiquitous. So, back to the application. The new perimeter is your application. We focused a lot on developers in this talk, and we have, several things going there. We got decentralized networks. Everybody's doing containers and microservices, and then everything is online, right? We're not building, back office applications as much anymore. Everything has a mobile app. Everything is an application these days. It's not a big giant data center that's mushy on the inside, and then you're able to look at operating system level exploits and statistics. A lot of things are on the public cloud and small decentralized networks. So your application is really the front door, not only to an attacker, but to your business. And then, I think the other important thing to highlight here is that, everyone's deploying all day, every day. And so with any deploy that you have, anyone can change the perimeter of that application. So I think we've covered this pretty well, but there's, many, many kinds of applications these days. We have containers, we have microservices, and I think that's an important thing to distinguish. There's, many of us here running on the public cloud and rely on Amazon or Google or Azure for a lot of operating system level and managed service level protections, but we all develop our own custom applications, and our, the way we add value is by building these applications. So we'll go back to applications one more time. This is a 3-step process. We'll start with the application. And really, my point that I'd like to make here is whenever you invest in DevSecOps, your approach changes on how we're going to do security. Instead of taking a waterfall approach where we try to fix all security problems before we release a product, we're going to take a risk-based approach, and we're going to take responsibility for one change and then automate it. We're going to build on our existing pipelines and insert security, and then do it again. With each iteration, we're going to iterate on our security improvement, just the same way that we would with our own defects and things of that nature. And we can look at our custom code, and we can look at our libraries to assess, our most vulnerable and highest risks that we have in place. So this is, we make the pipeline story sound very simple. It's left to right, left to right, left to right. But really, for many of us, this is the cycle where it's kind of an infinity loop that just never stops. We write our code, we do our planning, and then we build our applications. We run our tests, we release the code, we deploy it, then we operate it, then we monitor it, and the cycle just repeats over and over and over. And that's how we need to think about security as well. It's a never-ending process that where you're at in this infinity loop, is greatly going to impact sort of the security processes that you're going to be investing time in. And so, I don't know about you guys, but we use ChatOps. We have the pager in our pocket. Everything we have nowadays gets integrated into something, whether it's our ChatOps tools or Sumo Logic or something like that. But if everyone's going to work where they want to work, if you're in a small company or a big company, everyone is kind of different and makes their own choices. And I think it's important that you put the information, where the people that can consume it in an easy and straightforward way. All right, so this will be a really quick screenshot demo. Just of how we ourselves use Contrast and Sumo together. So this is an example application called Webgoat. Has anybody here heard of Webgoat? Yeah? Okay, Webgoat's an intentionally vulnerable application. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's great to learn about security. I myself have done a ton of the lessons. It's been super helpful just to learn about various types of exploits and how they work and how to remediate and stop them. And so what we do here is we'll download an agent from Contrast, spin it up and start Webgoat, and then I'm going to go to a very easy example here where we take a SQL injection vulnerability and we hit go and exploit our application. If we were in a pipeline of sorts right here, what we'd be doing is running our functional tests over Webgoat and seeing that this is an input field. We're going to test it and make sure that our application is working as we expect it with that agent running alongside it. And so then whenever we come back to our dashboard here, we can see that there's a whole slew of vulnerabilities, which is sort of what we expected with Webgoat. But there's a couple of those that are difficult there. And so in this case, what I'd suggest we do is we have checks in our build pipeline where if we find a critical or high or medium vulnerability, whatever your tolerance is, you're able to block your build and stop your build so that you can't release that code. Like I said, my favorite feature of Sumo, it's hokey, it's been around for a long time, but it is incredibly useful. You can take this endpoint and throw all kinds of things at it. We use it heavily at Contrast to accept different types of data. And in this case, we went ahead and integrated this endpoint with Contrast's own webhook integration. And so you can see here on this next page that we're going to do a very simple parsing exercise to identify that. In this case, we were only looking for high and critical vulnerabilities. And we can see that our application named Webgoat has high and critical vulnerabilities. I can say, to expand on this, one thing we do is we send this notification to our own Sumo endpoint, and we trend our vulnerabilities over time so that we can see, how many lows, how many mediums, how many highs, where that falls in the process. We link that data back into Bitbucket for pull requests and into Jira so that we can see all that information about what we're doing with our security processes in the same place. All right, that's it. I was a little faster than I expected, but any questions?
Thanks, David. I'm curious, on your own DevSecOps journey, what were some of the speed bumps and how you guys got around that?
So, I came to Contrast not working at a security company before, and it was an intimidating process. I've been there about 4 years now. And so, one thing we did is we documented early in the process what we're going to do with our own product development lifecycle. So we had the human process at the very beginning. We're going to address any things about the requirements of a product, whether it's access control based or who can see it or how we're going to protect this data, and then also provide a lot of visibility because we're growing and changing over the years, and what happens with these systems, how do we make these systems resilient, our pipeline resilient, so that if someone commented out the section that did our security testing, how are we aware of that? So we had to think about, like, if things go wrong, how are we going to have backups and backups and backups to sort of the protections that we had in place. I think that's been one of the more interesting parts, and we use Sumo to send that data as well.
We got some questions from the audience, so I'll give them another chance at you here.
Hi, I saw on one of the slides you put security as code. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if the Webgoat was the example, but what's the...
Security as code?
Yeah, how do you...
So for example, ensuring that if our pipeline changed, that we have a backup to that. And I think making sure that your pipeline is checked in. So that's just one aspect of having security code. It's like having a stage in your pipeline that measures security for the delivery of your application, and having a backup that, if they got removed, it doesn't go unnoticed. So it's not a human process. That's the whole point is just to automate security.
So it's something that, like the process is the code, and then like you check it in, and that is the security as code.
Similar to like infrastructure as code.
Right.
You want to make sure that whatever your infrastructure is, in a deployed state, it can also be re-represented in a repository somewhere along the way.
Okay.
And so like what that means kind of depends on if it's in a container or running on native instances in Amazon, or it's a little bit specific to your own team.
Yeah, the other way I've heard it put is security as a measure of quality across the
yeah.
The whole flow.
I think one thing we say is that like a vulnerability is just another bug. There are bad bugs. Like a critical vulnerability is a very, very bad bug, but security is just another form of quality.
I'd be curious to hear what kind of interesting things you might have found with the Sumo app in your environment.
In terms of quality?
or just in the wild, the things that you might have picked up, or even from your customers that are interesting use cases that the tool might have highlighted.
What do you mean? I don't really follow you.
Yeah, just any kind of anomalies or bugs or events that were surfaced through the Sumo tool that kind of surprised you or interesting?
I mean, we use Sumo very heavily for monitoring queues. So Contrast is an agent-based technology just like Sumo is. We have all these agents that are deployed all over the place, and they phone home to one central service. And so we use queuing heavily to prioritize and do that work in the background. And so that's one of our biggest and primary use cases for Sumo that is like integrated everywhere, various thresholds into our chat tools and different thresholds into our alerting and 24/7 monitoring. It's also just on a TV in our office. We've talked about making it a dashboard for new employees whenever they get their new computer. Like, here's the Sumo Logic dashboard if you're in the engineering team for valuable metrics around the application health.
Does Contrast itself tie into any automated pipelines that are out there, like Jenkins, Chef Automate, or any of that? And do you guys have any work-throughs that work posted anywhere?
Yes. I can share them with you.
So you came from dev environment, or really the dev side of things. So
I did.
What has been helpful to empower you with the security tools? Like how engaged, and I want to hear like how closely engaged is your security team to help you really make these changes and drive, potentially a culture change to get this adopted?
So fortunately, Contrast was born from security practitioners, and so it was pervasive from the very beginning. And so everyone who's joined Contrast has also been sort of security inclined and security curious, where even if they hadn't, like myself, I worked in education before Contrast, and so I was familiar with data protections and some compliance things around where data can be and move and travel and things like that. But it really, for us, it became core to the very, very, very early stages of not only just like how do you like interview and behave and think about security, but then with our product management team and our engineering process and managers, like every requirement considers security from the very beginning, and then we ensure that there's good visibility around this, and there's a little bit of shaming that occurs in good fun. I mean, we joke that we have like a hashtag blameless culture, because you can't, we couldn't do this well with people not being open and transparent about mistakes they make. Like, we did this thing where if you introduce a bug in production, it's not your fault. It's the people that approved your PR are the people that have to go resolve it. So that's very much like it's an accountable, sort of like peer-based culture. Yep.
Yeah, I've actually seen where in a more collaborative mode where they'll use the teams in a rotation where bugs are thrown up as kind of a jump ball, and it may go to the DevOps side or the security side, and you want to be careful about who you blame, because that finger might be pointing back at you in some cases. So.
Yeah, there's just a lot of transparency. Yeah. We do this thing where everyone rotates on like a one week rotation, where you're just unscheduled. You don't have any scheduled work. So you may work customer support issues, you may work customer calls, you may work a security escalation. We don't really delineate between security, like dev, and ops, and it's all very. Everyone can work on kind of everything. I mean, there's people specialize and gravitate towards certain areas of the stack and product based on their interests, but there's everything. Everybody, we try to get everyone involved with everything.
It's really kind of moving away from security as kind of the department of blame to more of a ubiquitous measurement of quality.
Yeah.
What other questions do you folks have in the audience? Okay, if not, maybe we can.
Okay.
I think they will be here a
Sure.
few minutes after me for additional questions you might want to ask. Didn't want to ask publicly, but round of applause for David for
Thanks.
being our customer presenter, telling some of our good stories.